Okay, welcome. Hope this is working well. Hi. So, I'm going to try to cover everything related to the pose editor and how I use it in production. When I use it, when I'm not using shapes from Brave Rabbit. So, yeah, let's get this started. Perfect. So, yeah, don't hesitate. If you have any questions, throw it into the chat and I'll try to answer it. So here I have a rig just with one skin cluster, which is on dual quaternion mode. Not that this makes any difference. Well, I actually always prefer using dual quaternion skinning when doing corrective shapes work. It just behaves better in the interpolation of the deformation. So yeah, nothing really fancy. This is a rig done with an M-Gear that I think I used for the presentation of the DAC menu. And I have the joint expose and the shape expose, nothing fancy over there. So I'm going to try to take as an example the pivot, the control that I use in here on the legs. That is like a clavicle sort of control, which doesn't exist in reality, but I actually like putting it in the other way, in the other part. So it actually creates a good motion, like a dog lifting the leg when peeing and stuff like that. So it works pretty well. But the thing is, if we paint this joint taking way too much influence when going up, it might just not work with the rest of the spine. That you want to have as much flexibility as you can on your painting by default, of course. So here we're getting some nasty intersections of the geometry itself. So yeah, let's try to fix that. So I'm not gonna go through the menus. The pose editor, it's fine in the animation editor, pose editor, but I'm usually gonna open it with Brave Rabbit. Not Brave Rabbit, sorry, Cosmos, which is a nice tool to use. And one of the first things you need to know about the pose editor is that it has two display modes. The default one, which is kind of a summary mode in which you only see the interpolator nodes and the poses that you have. And the other one is the advanced mode. And when you're actually doing work with the pose editor, you should always actually have the advanced mode on so that you can actually edit what you're doing and set up in a way that you want. So the way the pose editor works is that it expects a transform, a joint, and it's going to store positions for those that transform, and it's going to output a weight that you can connect it to blend shapes. So this UI is specifically made to handle blend shapes being driven by the node itself. So it doesn't mean that you cannot drive anything else with it, but it's just that this UI is specifically made for blend shapes. So first of all, I'm going to select one joint, and it's the skin joint that I want to be the one driving the pose interpolator node. It doesn't necessarily need to be the skin joint, but it needs to be a joint or something on your rig that it's the one triggering the deformation that you actually want to correct, right? So with that joint selected, I'm gonna be in advanced mode, and I'm gonna create pose interpolator, right? And one of the first things that this do is it creates basically this pop-up menu, pop-up message that asks you if you it's basically telling you that the joint or the transform that you selected is being driven already by something else on the rig, and basically when creating the pose interpolator node, it tries to create not the bind pose, but the pose, the reset pose in which you created that interpolator. And because it's already connected to something, it's basically telling you, hey, I cannot reset those poses or whatever you're going to do back to those poses because they're connected, and it asks you if you want to create them anyway. So you can hit yes or no. If you hit no, it's not going to create these three guys, right? So what are these three guys? These three guys are basically the neutral pose of the joint. So it's basically, it stores the pose in which you created the pose interpolator. But the thing with it is that because this joint is already being driven by the control, if I double click in here, you see nothing is happening because it just cannot reset back to the position. The idea with these guys, is to be able to reset back to the neutral position, and it's like the starting calculation for those poses, right? So basically what I'm going to do is, now that they're created, I'm actually going to trash them all the 3 of them. So this is actually kind of the same, is that when you create the joint, the pose interpolator, you hit no, it's not going to create the poses. So basically that's actually how I do it. And then what I'm going to do, the first thing I'm going to do is actually tell the system, before creating any pose, which is the controller that I'm going to use, not to drive anything, it's just to help me pose things around. So basically here is going to be this control. And where do you put that? It's in here. So if you are not in the advanced mode, you're in the default view, you cannot do that. So you need to go into the advanced mode. And then here is telling you the joint. Then you have the twist axis. So you should check before adding actually any control or doing any pose. Check if actually the twist axis that the joint uses is the correct one being set up here. So I'm going to actually check in here if X, it's the default twist axis for this joint, and it actually is. If I select the joint and I actually go into the rotate mode, you see X is the one actually doing the twisting, Y it's the one going up front and back, Z is up and down. So actually X is just twisting. So here it's correctly set up, and usually if you use joints as Maya defaults, this should be okay. So to add the control of the as a driver that is going to help you manipulate the poses, you need to click in here, add, and it's going to display this thing. And I think all the demonstrations that you see, they go in the outliner and try to select the attributes from the outliner, which is, I think, kind of hard. So basically what I usually do is I copy paste the name of the control, I hit add, it's gonna pop in this dialog, and I'm gonna hit copy paste the name of the control, and I'm gonna tell the attributes that I want to be able to reset. So it's gonna be the rotation, because this control has only the rotations. If I had the translations, I would actually add them as well. So now here I just have the rotation, so I'm gonna just hit this. So now that this control is add, I'm gonna go in here, I'm gonna right click, and I'm gonna hit add neutral poses. And now that I have those neutral poses set up, I can basically double click in any of this, and you see it's gonna reset to that neutral, the pose in which you added. And this is crucial for you to be able to go back and forward with the work that you're gonna do with the interpolator node. So that's one of the first thing. I hope this is actually pretty clear. So I'm gonna just do it again. I'm gonna trash this interpolator. So first select the joint, add the interpolator. I'm not gonna add the default poses, so I'm gonna hit no. Then I'm gonna set up the controller that is linked to that driver, which is gonna be this one. I'm gonna hit add, copy paste the name and the attribute, rotate, and then and this is done. Now right click in here, add neutral poses. So once you have done this, you're good to go to actually start creating poses. So one of the first thing that I'm going to do is actually create just one pose, so that I know this interpolator is going to drive one specific blend shape node. So something I like doing is starting by the order of the attributes. I'm not going to do the twist right now. I'm just going to do the y-axis. I think that but for the sake of demonstration, usually the way I do it is by order of axis, but that doesn't mean I'm just gonna go into the z-axis just to fix this, because it's a little bit more easy to see what's going on. And something that I really do is always try to put values that are easily to remember as well. I'm not gonna put like lots of decimal whatsoever. So I'm not gonna go just use the mouse and say, oh, I'm gonna correct this pose and leave that value as it is. I'm going to try to put close values, and something that is really important is that you try to hit a maximum amplitude on the correction that you're trying to achieve, so that you have the maximum amplitude on that corrective, which is usually good. The more amplitude you're fixing, the more linear skinning is going to require you to create in-between sections sometimes. Dual quaternion might not as much, But yeah, keep that in mind as well, that for big range corrections, you might need to add more correctives in between that range. So now that I'm here in this pose, I'm gonna actually create in here, and I'm gonna hit add pose. And now check this out, because this is the first pose that I create, it's actually opening this menu, right? Which is actually asking you, hey, this interpolator needs to be linked to a plane shape node, because again, I told you that the pose editor is really made to drive plane shapes, right? So here I don't have anything created, so it's actually asking me, do you have to create the pose shape? Yeah. Is it a new deformer? Is it already a plane shape node already exists in the scene? What's the name that you want to do? And do you actually want to create those plane shape nodes on every single mesh that is bind to this joint, or just in the selected? I usually go, if I don't have the node, obviously, I'm gonna go by the selection. And this is just the matter of preference. I just like to hit BS, and it's gonna be new because I don't have any plane shape node in here right now. And then I'm gonna go selected, not bind to joint. That way it doesn't add any plane shape node to anything extra. And this is gonna be pre-deformation. You can put it in automatic, it will work as well. I mean, it will search for the order, and usually it places it correctly. And I'm gonna hit create pose shape. So now that I hit create pose shape, you see that the plane shape node has been added to the geometry, and there's a connection to it, and you are on edit mode directly on the geometry. Here is where I want to emphasize that one of the first things that you should do is actually not go directly and sculpt your corrective. You should go and just hit this edit and leave it off, so that one of the first things you do is set up poses that you need to correct. So this is the important thing that you need to know about the pose interpolator, is that the more poses you add, the more accurate not the computation, but reaching that pose it will be. So let me explain. If I'm actually, let me just close this and let's tear off the plane shape, copy this tab, which is the plane shape node, and I'm gonna select the control. So you see here, basically, when I'm driving this control, well, basically going up, it's reaching that pose, of course, but going front is already giving values to this plane shape. It's basically because the pose interpolator node at this stage, it only has the neutral poses and that pose to be derived. So basically, from your neutral pose, it's always going to try to reach that, not to reach, but it's gonna trigger that plane shape, because it's basically doesn't have anything else to relate to. And this is crucial because if you're actually going to try to fix just one pose, it doesn't mean that you should only add that pose into the driver node, because adding more poses will actually make it more accurate. So let me show you this. So here when I go front, you see already, like for 20 degrees, minus 20 degrees, we're already having 20% almost of that corrective being triggered. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create another pose, which will be, for example, y, it's actually y minus 30. And now that the plane shape node, it's already created one time, the pose interpolator knows that it's already driving a plane shape node, so adding a pose is as simple as just add pose, and it doesn't ask you again to which plane shape you want, because it's already driven here. And again, it goes automatically into edit mode. Don't edit anything at this stage yet. So now that I actually have this pose into the front, check this out. The first one, it's getting triggered. It's not getting triggered anymore, because now it has more values, more poses to compare to, right, to reach. So this is going to be more accurate, right? Because when you're going front, not much of this is going to get triggered. So not much of the corrective up is going to get triggered. So one of the first thing I do is this. I go for all the axes, that I know that I need to correct. So let's go actually 30 now, and I add that pose as well. I don't go into edit mode, right? Then I go, sometimes you have this, it's a refreshment issue rather than a pose issue, so don't pay too much attention to it. And let's say that, yeah, this is crazy offset, but why not? Add pose and edit. So basically now, if I double click here in the neutral, you see the control is resetting back to that pose. If I go here, it goes to that pose. If I go here, it goes to this pose, and this pose. And actually, let's check what is going on with the blend shape node itself to see how this is behaving. So let's turn off that again, because again, Maya always likes to have refreshment issues. Jesus, look at this, having refreshment issues even in here. Thank you, Maya. So let's go back to the neutral pose. And now you see that going front is only triggering this value, but you see you still have some small parasites of values, and I'm going to explain that later on. But this is already interpolating way better than just if you had just one or two poses. So I actually recommend to always, even if you're not doing any sculpting, you should create poses, because this will help how the pose interpolator drives things around. So now you can actually start playing with some of the settings that the advanced tab has. And first of all, the interpolation itself. For now, it's interpolating between those poses in a linear way. You could actually go into a Gaussian mode, which is going to be a little bit more smoother, but it really depends on what you're trying to achieve. So one is not better than the other. They're just different, and it gives different results. So keep that in mind. I usually actually turn off allow negative weights, which will make even this a little bit better, but again, it really depends on what you're trying to achieve. Basically, what the allow negative weights is doing is that it allows the blend shape node to go into a minus value of it. Sometimes it's interesting, actually, sometimes it isn't. Really depends what you're trying to achieve again, but I usually turn it off, especially for this type of work. You need to know that corrective shapes are usually a sculpt for a specific pose. So unless you're actually applying an in-between shape in a negative value into the same target, there's just no need to go into negative spaces for this type of work. At least on my own personal experience. Maybe I don't know, something that Chad wanted to do with this. So I should ask him actually. Anyway, track rotations. Yeah, I'm tracking the rotation of the joints. And do you want to track the translations? By default, this is off. So keep this in mind, because this is really interesting. When your control, and I'll try to do an example with that later on. If your animation control offsets the joint in translation mode, tracking the translation will allow you to decrease the amount of input of the blend shape when you're going away from that pose, right? When the translation is offsetting the joint from that pose, which will decrease the amount of this. If you don't want to track them, it means that whether or not you're actually on the pose and translate it offsetting from it, the values here will stay the same, right? I hope this is clear. If the chat has any comment, let me know. So those three settings really important. Now I'm going to actually talk about the regularization. And normally, I think that there was a nice documentation about it on my helps, but basically what it's trying to do is that if you have several poses in the way of how things interpolate, is that sometimes you get some wiggling effects from the interpolation, and this comes again from the amount of poses that you have. So it's not that the more poses you have, the better the transition will be. It's just that the more isolated their weights will be. And the problem with that is that usually it creates micro values of how the interpolation is being driven from one thing to the other, right? And this is why you have the interpolation setting. You can change it to Gaussian, and it's going to change a little bit how these weights gets driven, you see, because the Gaussian has a more smoother effect at the beginning than the linear weight, so you have less. But that being said, you will still get this type of transition in effect, right? Because it's going to go to that pose, then maybe to that pose, or trying to go to that pose. So the regularization, if I'm not mistaken, I think it's that, yeah. The higher value you put, the more straight it's going to try to behave to that poses. So rather than doing this wibbling effect on the transition, it's trying to smooth that out. I think that's the setting between, that this allows. Let me put it, I don't know if it goes higher than 10, yeah. Anyway, I usually don't use it too much. The only cases I've used it in the past is when I actually do have a lot of poses, like I'm combining several degrees in between, because you can actually create that as well, I suppose. What I mean is that you can actually say that you're fixing minus 25 and 25 degrees in here, for example, as a pose, and this is a pose. And when I actually do like a full circle of this type of corrections, I usually tend to add a little bit of regularization out of it. The output smoothing, I usually don't use it. And yeah, that's pretty much what I use. Here, when you actually select one of the nodes, it tells you to which plane shape target it's being connected to, right? And there's other settings in here. I'm not going to go through them right now. I'm actually going to explain how I go around and fixing actually the poses, because for now I just added the poses, but I haven't done any corrective work right now. So let's actually do this right now. So I'm going to go to this pose now. I'm going to actually save this so that if it crashes, I already have this. One of the things that till now I think is still bugging is the fact that when you go into edit mode in here and start using Maya's skull tool, which is the one being used by default, so it's this one. Oops. This one. It might be that once you're going to go off the edit mode, your corrective will be completely screwed. And I don't know, there's something in between this UI and the shape UI that doesn't work really well. So usually what I like doing is not going into edit mode like this. Is actually I know this is gonna sound a little bit tricky, but I'm actually gonna duplicate the mesh. I'm gonna call it sculpt for now. And because this doesn't have any rig anymore, I know that I can fool around without knowing that I'm interacting with anything else. I use a lot of tools I use basically 3 tools when sculpting corrective shapes. I use the Maya one. I use the old one from Maya, which is not accessible anymore from the edit mesh. It's only accessible from the surface skull geometry tool. So this is the old Maya one. And I use the one from Brave Rabbit, the sculpting one from Brave Rabbit that comes with shapes. One of the first things that I do with zones that get carved in like this is I like going into Maya's tool, and I'm going to go into fill mode. Let's see if, yeah, the scale here might not work on this. Let me see. Oops. Yeah. So what is nice about the fill is that yeah, it's going to actually fill all those gaps. So rather than starting pushing vertices around or whatever, I'm just basically filling this gap, and I'm going to actually start smoothing with shift as well. And yeah, this is more modeling work than whatsoever. Just telling the quick process that I usually take before even doing any anatomical work or whatsoever, just to help me start getting into one pose. Right? You can export this, and as well the fact that this is a separate mesh. I trust more the mechanism to send it to ZBrush or Mudbox if you want to. That is just an edit mode. There's just so much that can go wrong on this stage. And one of the reasons I still use a lot the tool from Maya, so the old one, is that it had the auto smooth when pushing things around, which is really, really useful when you're trying to do work on the geometry. Let's see. Displacement, why is this not doing anything? Every time it's a demo effect. It's always cool. Yeah, sorry, it's just that these settings are done for 0.1 scale, and this asset is a little bit bigger than the scale I used to work with rigs, so these values are really small for that case, so I have less amplitude as a default one. So yeah, this is basically what I do. Let's actually finish up a little bit this. I'm not going to go into much accurate deformation work in here, but let's say that this is good enough for now. So now that I have that, how do I trigger back this corrective to be the one being here? I'm actually gonna calculate myself with the same command that this uses, the corrective. So to do so, if you go into the plugins, settings, plugin manager, and you search for pose. So basically, the pose interpolator node that is being created by the pose editor, it's a plugin node, right? And that plugin node comes with three different things. It comes with the node itself, the dependency node, which is the pose interpolator node, which is what you're seeing in here. And it comes as well with two commands, the pose interpolator and mirror shape, right? These are two commands that you can use to use with interpolator. And another thing that this has in the same tab, let me just, I hope it's not gonna invert. Let's see. This is, you hate when Maya does this. Let's close it, and I think I'm not gonna be able to show it again because it has this filtering issue. Yep. Hang in there. Let's see if I close all groups, show all plugins. Come on. Okay. So I think the command is invert shape. Let's actually, let me open another Maya while I think about this and I try it. So basically what I'm going to use is the same command that Maya uses to calculate the corrective shape, and I hope this is going to work because I don't know it by heart. And to do that, I'm going to stay on the pose that is being fixed, right? And I'm going to select the sculpt, and I think it's on this sense, and I'm going to type invert shape. Yep, it's invert shape. So the command, it's invert shape, right? So when you hit invert shape on that, it's actually gonna extract it from it, the real corrective that needs to get applied to your work, right? Let me actually close this thing. So if you, what's the shortcut to get the sculpt menu? Yeah, I usually do shift right click being hold. So I actually hold on shift, hold on the right click, and it actually shows you the menu from the modeling tools, and you can go into the sculpt tool. And for the other one, from the old one from Maya, you can create yourself a shortcut, but I usually create it on a shelf. So yeah, now that actually I have this thing, and I know it sounds really convoluted as a technique to plug this, you can try it on yourself to go directly into edit mode and edit, but once you're going to go off the edit mode, it might happen that your corrective shape is completely screwed, especially if you use the sculpting tool from Maya, which is weird. But yeah, I like it. This is safer. At least I know that I'm not breaking anything else, and it's a little bit instructive as well. So what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to show you what is happening with the, oops, no, I deleted the node. I didn't want to delete the node. I'm going to select the node. I'm going to go into the node editor. So this is the blend shape node, right? And the weights of it is being driven by this guy, right? So the first one, it's funny because you see several poses in here, 0, output 0, 1, and 2. And basically these three first guys corresponds to the first 3 neutral poses in here. So this first 3 index stores basically the neutral poses in here, right? And now you have the weight being of the one that I'm editing being here. So this is the first target, right? So into the blend shape node itself, I'm going to actually plug in the deformation of that corrective shape. So I'm going to go into the connection editor, and I'm going to put the blend shape node in here. I'm going to go into target origins, but input targets. And usually, yeah, you need to know a little bit about how the blend shape node works. But yeah, the first blend shape is actually target group 0, right? It creates this huge list of attributes. And the first index of the shape itself starts at 6,000. I'm not going to go too much into details into that, but that's the case. So I'm going to basically select the shape of what I extracted, right? And I'm going to put it in here. I'm going to hide this for now, and I'm going to plug in the out shape, the out mesh of this into the input geometry target. And you're going to see what's going to happen to the geometry. Boom. And now that that's connected, the information on this attribute, it's being updated, so I can disconnect it and I can delete actually my sculpt. Right? And now I have this, right? And one of the reasons, again, that I told you about amplitude is that now that you actually corrected this, it actually gives the animator more flexibility, and they will rather go even higher up, because animators always go to extreme poses. And again, this is a simple case scenario. I'm going to actually try to go into edit mode, but in a different way. Let's actually do that. I'm going to go into this pose, right? Actually, let's fix another one. Yeah, well, actually, let's try this one. And rather than going into edit mode in here, I'm going to use it, go from the shape editor. And let's see if that creates a different effect when using the Maya Sculpt tool, but I highly doubt it. So I'm on this pose, I'm going to go edit mode. So now I'm on edit mode. So I can basically start using Maya Sculpt tool. Gonna smooth this a little bit. Not doing really any corrective work per se, but at this stage, you can do whatever work you actually need to do. If you need to fill in some gaps in some places, use the fill tool, which is going to allow you to really fill those gaps in a lot of places, right? There's a lot of stuff that come from the geometry itself, right? But it's important, relevant to keep some of the volume. Let's see, and normally, if we're lucky, and I go into edit, but here it should call the same command, so it should work. It's just that in some cases I get bad surprises while using the edit mode on the shapes editor and on the pose editor, which is the same. Actually, it's triggering the same thing, but I've seen cases, scenarios in which the corrective shapes being extracted from it, it's completely broken up. And the reason I use the Maya Sculpt tool in edit mode is that there's a delta smooth brush. Yeah, it works well. Another thing that I want to show you guys that is actually pretty interesting when doing corrective shapes is the following. So let's say that, let me go back to the pose editor. I'm using the script to copy the sculpted mesh to the mesh, transfer the vertex position over. Yeah, that's actually a good way of doing it as well. Yeah, ideally it's just, I don't know, again, the work that Autodesk and the guys did on the edit mode, it works well, but I don't know, there's something between the tool, the sculpting tool itself, and how the extracted pose gets computed, that there's something sometimes in the evaluation. At the moment it computes the corrective shape, that it doesn't work all the time. Anyway, what I'm going to do, let's say that you want to easy up or help yourself doing corrective shape work because you're not too fancy of sculpting yourself. Something that you can do, oops, delete it again, other nodes that I shouldn't, delete node. So what I'm going to do is actually add into the geometry. I'm going to select it, I'm going to go into the form, and I'm going to add the delta mesh, and the tension deformer, right? And what I'm going to do is tweak the values for this to help me out on some corrective. So I'm going to put the distance weight to 1. This here, the tension deformer, I'm going to turn off the squash, and I'm just going to get I'm just going to keep the stretch constraint and put it in relative mode. And I'm going to go into the same position that I fix later on. I'm going to see what I had before with or without. Right? I have this without, I just had this. Right? Now I can have this, so there's a little bit more tension being simulated in here and more things. But the thing is, you might not want all the time to keep, obviously, those deformers on because they might just screw up other parts of the rig. Yeah, you can paint the weights of those as well. But the idea is that now that you have this set up, you can actually duplicate that mesh, right? And you can turn off now the envelope of these two deformers, and you have the duplicated mesh, right? On the duplicated mesh, because you use those deformers to help you out with some of the correctives, it already will kind of get you going with some of the corrections that you need to do. Then you can do a little bit more extra work, whatever you need. And now actually that you have that, and you have turned off those deformers on the other one, you can recalculate a new plane shape for it, right? And now that I have this new plane shape for it, I can plug it in again into my rig. So let's see, this wasn't off. You need to be careful that this is off when doing so, and hopefully this is going to work. Sorry, so I'm going to take the shape of this, which is the new calculated plane shape, and I'm going to go into the plane shape node that I'm going to add in here. So again, just previously out mesh, and you need to be careful in which one you're adding here. I know that it was the first, so, and yeah, it didn't work in this case. Damn it, always the demo effect. So this corrective, this calculated shape is not correct, so I'm going to fix that. I'm going to delete this one. So this was my pose, and this one is the one being trigger. I'm actually going to delete this for now, and let's give it another try like this. Invert shape. So is this guy being computed correctly? I think now it is correctly computed. That mesh. Yep, now it's good. So now this is my new corrective. So yeah, it might seem a little bit again complex as a technique, but using the depth mesh and the tension to get a corrective going usually solves a lot of issues, especially if you're trying to solve really complicated areas. And now that you've kind of have set up your corrective and your pose interpolator, one of the last things that you actually need to do is tell the system where this goes. Usually the way you would want this to be working is to be parented to the parent of the same joint, so this one, so that it lies within the same space of the joint, so it stays close to that space, which helps because sometimes, depending on how you're triggering the pose interpolator, you might get different results. Basically, you want that when activating the blend shape and actually moving the rig around like this, that blend shape stays the same, right? That it stays trigger all the time. So in previous version of Maya, I don't know if it's in the case in this, if the pose interpolator doesn't lie within the same structure when actually offsetting, it might change the behavior of this. But yeah, it really depends on the version of Maya. There was a bug with this in the past and how the nodes in here are connected. But yeah, actually this pretty much covers it. Using this I have the impression that the edit mode works well with the skull brush, but not with all modeling tools. Yeah, it might be the case. Yeah. Yeah, I think that pretty much covers it. I don't know if I'm not forgetting anything. I usually put this in here, and yeah. So just remind yourself. So for example, if you're using the pose interpolator node to fix just one single axis, usually the knees or the elbows. Still, if you're doing so, add more poses to it. So let's say you're fixing the knee here. So I'm going to create a new pose interpolator in here. I'm not going to create default poses. So I'm going to link that pose interpolator to this node. Rotate. And I'm going to actually add the translate as well, because here it's unlocked. So maybe I can explain now the track translation. I'm going to hit allow negative weights off. I'm going to add the neutral poses now that this is on, and I'm going to actually create myself a fixed pose. Let's say -35, whatever. Add pose. It's telling me to which node, because it's the first time I do the plane shift, so I know that I don't want a new, I want an existing, which is this one. Create pose, and you don't have to select the mesh anymore, because yeah, that plane shift is being related to the geometry, so you're good to go. And I'm gonna add as well like an extension pose, which is the other sense, even if I'm not actually adding any sculpted to the pose. You might actually want as well to do this, even if it's not really something accurate on the rig. Again, it's just help you out with the how much accuracy of interpolation you have on this pose, right? And normally, now that we have the track translation and we left it at 0, 0 here, normally when we offset away, those blend shapes should get triggered down. Let's see. I'm gonna copy the tab. That's the reason of it. So normally here, this is I'm fully at 1 here, and normally when I get away, yeah, funny, it's tracking the other way around because it's changing the order, but yeah, it's tracking the translation, so it's totally changing the values of it. You see it's not accurate what it's doing. It's going crazy how the values are being done. I guess that it's implying let's actually not track the translation, see what happens. Yeah, you see there's totally different behavior on the blend shape nodes, how they get triggered. Yeah, cool. I hope this helps you guys. It's pretty roughly, but for me this is enough. I mean, in a sense that there's not much to it. The last thing I didn't cover is the mirror part. So let's actually try to cover this and see if we manage to make it work correctly. So again, I tried to make it lie the node in same parent space than the other one. So mirroring, it's not complicated. You actually select the interpolator itself, go into poses, mirror, option box, object, and you hit apply. And the moment you're gonna hit apply, oh, wait, did it do it? Okay, let's actually do it with right click in here, mirror. Yeah, sorry, this is not the same. This is on the poses. I'm stupid. It's mirroring the poses of the target. Sorry, if you want to mirror the node itself, you do it on the node, right click, mirror, and then it's going to ask you as well the sense in which the order, not the order, but the direction in which Yeah, Chad usually goes from right to left. I usually go from. So actually, oops, let's do this like this because this is Hemgear. I could do actually this. I want to make it accurate on how it's calc finding. Let's hit OK. So when you mirror, it creates the pose interpolator. It's not going to parent it under the same relative parent of the other one, depending on the name. So you have to parent it as well yourself. And one thing it's doing, it's actually triggering these guys, the poses, and mirroring that blend shape to put it in here, right? But because of it, when it finish, it actually ends up on the last pose being triggered. Or the first, it really depends. I think it does it reverse. I don't know, recall. But anyway, one of the issues that these have, that the mirror has, is that normally you see here, when you hit add, it doesn't have the controller being added to it. So it doesn't actually allows you on the right side to go into that pose, which is kind of silly because then you cannot do that. And what I've tried, and I'm going to try it again because I haven't done this in a while, is once you could create the pose interpolator node yourself and add the control. And if I recall well, this didn't work, but I want to give it a try to actually hook in the node first before mirroring and doing the mirror just after. Yeah, it did give an error, but it did create the poses. And yeah, it's the extraction of the poses you see that doesn't work. Doesn't manage when you double click to go into those poses, which is kind of sad because it is what it is. But normally, the plane shape should have mirrored correctly, which is not the case in here. So let's trash this out. Let's see how. Yeah, I have an error in there, which I don't like. Yeah, mirroring is a little bit tricky. See, it did created the blend shape and the good driver, but the blend shape is not being mirrored correctly. So you might need to flip the targets with the shape editor. A little bit back and forward, right? Let's flip target and let's flip all these guys. And now normally this works. You see now this is corrected. So yeah, it really depends, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work well. Maybe I accidentally flip them before. Yeah, I do recommend that every time you're gonna save, those issues fixed. And I don't know, I don't use that much the pose editor in production. When I use it is when I'm not allowed to use shapes or any external party plugins within a project, because shapes, it does mirror better this stuff. So the only recommendation I can give you guys is that before mirroring, save your scene and give it a try one by one. Don't go crazy in selecting all your left drivers and hit mirror for everything at the same time. It just might not work. It's better go one by one, mirror, apply, and see how those behave. And yeah, that's pretty much it. You need to only know that there's no, I mean, there's probably a way, but I don't want to go into the node editor right now. But this interpolator node won't be driven by the control anymore. I mean, it won't have the control to reset to. So yeah, it's a little bit of a bummer. One try, the two, the last time. I haven't tried to. Yep. I really don't know in 2020. I've been using mainly this year 2019.1 and 0.2 on the project that I'm working on, which is not related to this asset at all. And I haven't had that much issues Maya related itself, but I know that some people have. And yeah, corrective shape work, I usually do it with shapes. which it has its own weight driver, and it you can actually use the one from Maya, right? You can actually create a pose interpolator itself, and it handles on his side. And yeah, there's a lot of documentation how this works, so I'm not going to go into details, but Ingo, this tool is amazing. So have you tried importing and exporting? Yes, I have, and I usually haven't had any problem with it. That being said, I think I recall, let me check, export all. Let's actually do it in here. Ah, yeah, right. Just 1 second, because I think that yeah, there was the export all and the export selection, and I don't recall if I actually did export per node, or I did export all. So actually, let's leave this like this. Give me 2 seconds, guys. So I'm gonna actually delete all this. So the blend ship node, it's still there, but it doesn't have any blend ship. I'm actually gonna fully delete it, like if I didn't have anything. Going to import. So the all does seem to trigger, but let's see how. Yeah, this is what I don't like. Basically it's completely ignoring the driver controller stuff that you set up in the past, but normally the blend ship should be driven correctly. It does seem to be the case. So yeah. And you have to try importing. Yeah, yeah. It's kind of sad because it doesn't have the relationship anymore. And actually, if I'm not mistaken, something that I did in the past is basically for. I actually created a script flow that will actually recreate all the setup with the controller linked to it. I could add this into a GitHub repository so that you guys have access to it. And yeah, I mean, there's way to selecting the pose, the node editor, I think the pose interpolator node itself, and adding the connections that you need. For example, if at this stage I have these poses and I go into that node, which is in here, the one from the leg tree joint. I'm actually going to take the other one. Let's take this one. Give me 2 seconds. There you go, which is the one that I'm having here. I'm going to hit add, put rotate again. Okay, and now you see that this connected in here, right? It's just, so it did add now the rotation into the driver controller, which is pretty cool. If you add more attributes, it's going to go into the other indexes. But the thing with that is that it doesn't store the values. So you need to basically go into the code, into a command, and add those values of rotation into that pose, so that the pose interpolator knows again which values were used on the control to actually go to the values applying to the joint. Because that's one thing. The nodes in here, the values in here, it's the values from the joint rotation. It doesn't mean that the values of the joint rotation are the same as the values of your control rotation, right? So, yeah. So, yeah, if you don't have any questions, I think I'm going to call it an end. It's almost an hour. I think I covered the most important things on it. Let's see. Yeah, so one last thing that I might want to mention, if you want to do a corrective for the twisting of an axis, then depending if you're doing that twist within another pose and everything, you might want to change this. So these poses for now are activated when you are on swing only. What that does mean is that if I go into into this, you see the pose stays, the shape stays, but I can actually change that to twist and swiggle, and you're gonna have different behaviors. And the more poses you add with twist only, for example, the different behavior you're gonna get, right? So yeah, that's pretty useful when you want to actually create a corrective, for example, only for twisting. I'm actually gonna put it on twist only, so that it knows that nothing else has to edit that triggered plane shape, which is usually good, not all the time. If you're actually correcting only the twist like this, you might want to add just twist only. But if you're actually correcting a pose in which you're like this, for example, values in everything, you might want to leave it on twist and swing and twist, so that it actually both twisting and swing of the Y and Z axis trigger that plane shape, right? Yep. Okay. Thanks everyone, and I hope this was useful. If you have any questions, the forum is there as well, and if this was useful, maybe I'll try to do another one with another topic in the future. Take care.